Okay. Right. Shall we come to order and make a start? So, yes, very good. So we promise you reflections across theory, policy, and practice in this session. I've recruited either last night or first thing this morning an expert panel to join me to discuss this. But what we're also going to hopefully do is open some of these questions. So I've got a few questions which we're going to use as the basis of our reflections. We will also open them to all of you, so there will be opportunities for various people to make comments. I just wanted to do a few quick kind of announcements about things that may be of interest to you, but certainly I need to get off my chest, which is the first one is we have the International Centre for Career Development and Public Policy, which is an international body that looks at career development issues across the world, and its next symposium is in November in New Zealand. And so one of the things that we're trying to do through that is to engage as many countries as possible in sending a team. And normally the team involves policymakers as well as academics, as well as potentially practitioner organizations and so on. So if anyone's interested in this, I mean, it's essentially an opportunity for kind of policy borrowing and lending. And come and talk to me, because I can tell you a bit more about it and support you to, put together a team from your country and to apply. So it's not really a thing that we sort of just go to as individuals. It's more of an activity for countries to put together some kind of social partner type team to go to. So that's one thing. Other thing I wanted to just let people know is that we have the NICEC journal, which is an open access journal. We've just published our latest issue, so that's available for people to look at. It's on ethics, philosophy, and what was the third? EPP. What would be the third thing? I can't remember. Principles, ethics, philosophies, and principles. So that's just come out. But one thing, we are very open in the NICEC journal to receiving critically focused papers. We've published a lot of things in that direction, and I think we're, to be honest, one of the few places increasingly in the career development field which will publish things which are theoretical and which are conceptual and not sort of just endless articulations of methods and results and so on. So the NICEC journal is something that I would flag to people as one place to publish and continue some of these discussions. And finally, I'm the editor of a new book series which is called Trotman Studies in Careers, Transitions and Employability. So if anybody has got a book in them that they're fearing is going to desperately try and get out over the next 2 or 3 years, then again, please come and talk to me about that, and we'll see whether we can find a place for you within this new series that we're editing. And again, it's going to be quite a lot of kind of critical social justice informed ideas in that. So that's all my announcements made. So what we're going to try and do is start with talking a bit about what some of the key issues are for careers. I'm going to ask my colleagues to give their reflections both on the conference and on their wider thinking on these issues. So my first question is really about what are the key issues that people are going to experience in careers. I've just looked at my phone and discovered that there's a new pandemic about to break out, so we might want to revisit that. I don't know how much fun it was last time for everybody here, but cruise ship, yeah. So,
but aren't they all contained?
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. But anyway, I'm not trying to panic you. Put your masks back on again. Is the thing. But the question I would like to start with is, given the discussions we've been having, if we think about how people's careers are going to move forward over the next few years, we've heard lots and lots of issues being discussed about crisis and about AI and about all sorts of different elements of the economy and so on. For you, we'll go down the whole line on this one, I think. For you, what sort of issues are you feeling are going to be the kind of key things? And perhaps just give us one or two each, and then we'll see whether anyone in the rest of the room has got any others. So I don't know who wants to start.
I don't mind.
Very good.
So yeah, I mean, I've been scribbling away today because I was invited to join this panel when I was slightly drunk last night. So so I thought I better be studious today. And what's quite interesting is, as I was making lots of notes throughout the conference, not just today as well, the word that seemed to keep coming up in my notebook and I kept underlining was collectivity, really. It's quite clear that the emphasis on critiquing career has been to critique neoliberalism, and rightly so. And a lot of people and a lot of the speakers have spoken about how neoliberalism is an atomizing process and an individualizing process, and how that makes workers and individuals more malleable and subject to changes, and many of the changes not being in the interests of the individuals and for elites. And so I think and whilst I really like the keynote speaker today in terms of how they were connecting with that, and I think the picture he painted was predominantly based on Portugal, because I didn't recognise the same sort of unionisation in the UK to the same extent. But I think what becomes interesting is the way in which we can. A lot of the talks that I've engaged, that I've have had the privilege to look at and observe over the last 2 days, have had in some description talking about how do we allow people to have voice, how do we allow people to have collective voices, how do we have people, how do we allow and create platforms and ways in which people can come together to actually start to forge futures that are in their interests rather than elites, was kind of like what I think is the main sort of challenge. And we can't escape AI and the role that might potentially play. And I really like the way that people engaged with AI in terms of that it has potentials to be good or have agency, was one discussion, debate that we kind of had. But but also, whilst there's lots of fear about how that will eliminate work, there was also ways in which we can look at the complexities of that in terms of, does it take away tasks? What kind of tasks? And I quite like the claims around being critical thinkers and having expertise in social science is very useful for actually being able to read those kind of situations. And then the final thing I'll kind of finish on is praxis, really, which is how can we use theory and the ranges of theories and perspectives and plurality of theories that I've heard over the last 2 days, and the kind of theories that people have engaged with in terms of Working Group 1. How can we use those theories in terms of action to inform action, and how can we do that collectively is kind of like the challenges that I read.
Great. Petra?
I think I might just start with rejecting the notion that we're the experts, or that I'm the expert anyway. And training guidance counsellors constantly. Is this on?
You might need to go a bit closer.
On this one.
Oh yeah, maybe. Is that better? No, might be on. Thanks. I'm constantly telling trainee guidance counsellors that you are not the expert either. Every person is an expert in their own lives. But anyway, what is, I suppose, my takeaway from both today and yesterday, I think, is that there's not much new stuff really happening, and things aren't as different now as they were. We've always been afraid of new technology and the impact that's going to have. Migration has happened for a long, long time, and mass migration as well. I know there was reference to the huge numbers in Portugal specifically this morning, and obviously those numbers are huge. But there were, not that long ago that Ireland's population halved. 4 million people migrated within a short space of time. So these things aren't new, but I think for every generation, they're new for us that live right now. So they're kind of scary, big prospects of war. Some would argue that, there's a lot more war, but also there's never been as much peace as there is at the moment. So there's a lot of contradictions flying around my head at the moment. But I think the challenges aren't all that different. But maybe how we're framing them or how we're thinking about them changes over time.
As it Dickens says, isn't it? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of want, it was the age of plenty, or something like that, isn't it? So, yes. Christina, have you got a take on what are the big issues facing people in their careers?
Well, is this working? It is working, yeah. I think the same as has already been said, picking up on the talks that we've had, sort of this thing about the demands on the individual to try and fit in. And what I thought about when I listened to all of you, and I can't even say which one said who, but I'll look at some of them having said something, is whether this feeling about how we fit into, whether it's going to be the labour market or the educational expectations of society, and that might even be different, as you said this morning. What are the expectations? And the thing about the difference in not just generations, we talked about that, but also the societies of what that means to be able to fit in, whether we fit into the labour market or the educational system because of expectations or because of finding our own way and what we want to do as such. And this thing about how we're not just expected to fit in and find a pathway in life, but it seems like we're also this Foucauldian notion of not just finding a path, but also loving it, living for it, leaving not a lot of space for utopia or thinking different about what we want in life. And obviously, I just spoke to Petra about in the break. A lot of what we've talked about, you keep connecting it with, I'm not an expert either, but all the stuff that's been said, obviously I draw into my own research and my own, what I've seen. And the difference is, right now, I think, at least in sociology in Denmark, we've talked about people having a different kind of resilience to the systems in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, and so forth. And it seems, and the movement in Denmark has been less resilience to the system, that people are more, or the young people are more and more do what they're expected to do. They go into STEM when they're expected to do it and do all these things. And the question is how they cope with that and what kind of mechanisms that career guidance throughout systems put in place for people to cope with that if they do.
So we've got in there, there's a lot there. So we've got like the balance between the individual and the collective responsibility. We've got AI, we've got migration, kind of responsibilization onto people. And then this sort of like governmentality that you're talking about there of like people being driven into particular directions. Is there anything that anybody else would like to raise that we've talked about or have not talked about over the last few days that we think is a really important thing that's gonna determine and shape people's careers?
There is one topic that is relevant for me in terms of the future of Europe, and is the aging of population. And I didn't hear so much about this issue. So we were mainly focused on youth, university students, adolescents, we can call how we want. but not so much on adults and older people and how all these elements of the aging population can impact us. Retirement in older ages and all this stuff that is around this topic.
Yeah.
I think it's important for Europe in the future.
Alex, up there.
So yeah, just the flip side of that point, obviously, which is the fall in birth rate right across Europe and the OECD, in the sense of, you know, I mean, we're below replacement rate in lots and lots of countries now, and so it's just the flip side of that point. It will affect future generations of workers.
Karen, yeah.
Just a quick comment. I think it's unusual that a lot of these crises that we come across, we get no warning, whereas this, we know this. We've known it for quite some time. I don't know exactly how long, but like the numbers are there, very available to us.
I was just going to say, it was mentioned briefly, intersectionality. So I think we have been thinking about some of the sort of issues that and challenges for those marginalised, but actually, I think there needs to be a bit more thinking about the sort of what happens when someone has, there's intersectionality and the compounding impact of that and what that means for someone's future and their opportunities as well.
We've got a comment at the back there, and then would you like to come back on that?
No, I can wait.
Okay.
Actually, it's not a comment. I'm checking the deliverables, especially for working group 2, and I don't know if it is the time to discuss about the future steps and things like that.
I think we'll probably come to that in the next session.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to say in this part, we speak about policy opportunities and all these things. Maybe we need to strategize what are we going to advocate for, and what kind of means are we going to use. I mean, there are huge funding, Green Deal and digital transitions has a lot of funding, and we see it definitely in the second one. And maybe we should have this kind of discussion, prepare the next year. I see that we have, let's say, the policymakers meetings and things like that. So maybe it's a nice time to discuss on this in the next session somewhere.
I mean, I think the addition. I mean, yes, we definitely do need to talk about that. And in a way, that's where the work packages move next year. But I think the addition there of climate change and of the policy responses to it seems to me to be pretty critical as context. But I mean, the other thing that I would add in, which is like probably characteristically gloomy for me, is if I look at most data about people's careers, then 2008 is the key determinant, the shape when we had a crisis in capitalism, and it shaped, with wage stagnation, so many things about how our careers have worked have been shaped by what happened in 2008. And I look at the AI investment bubble, and I look at the spike in oil prices that seems very likely, and I think it's very plausible that there's going to be another kind of crisis level economic event. And if we're looking forward for things that might make a difference, then it would seem like those kinds of things might be worth mentioning. Yeah, let's.
Just on this, we speak about the AI and a huge possible, let's say, upcoming is that the agentic AI is going to reshape the whole, let's say, all the activities of the humans. I mean, we're going to have digital assistants for everything, for emailing to the most, let's say, important thing. And it's not only the ChatGPT and things like that, but now it is evolving the physical AI, which physical AI with digital twins and big data and all these things modelize the natural setting into a virtual digital twin. And a lot of works are going to be conducted in the near future over there. So this changes the way the workforce needs to adapt and behave in the future. Maybe we can have this kind of discussions. It's something that
Right.
is.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got lots of issues to work with. What I wanted to do, as I'm aware time is short, but I wanted to turn back to the panel, because we've got all of these issues we're dealing with. One of the unique elements of this action is that we come at this from a theoretical perspective. We're not just examining these issues in general. But we're saying we've got some sense of where some of the answers may lie. First, to understanding them, and secondly, hopefully, to managing or solving them, which is in this rather ill-defined world of critical theory. And I wonder whether the panel would like to say something about which theoretical perspectives they've either heard in the last couple of days or that they would adhere to, that they think are particularly useful in helping us to manage these things. I don't know. Petra, do you want to start? Or?
I suppose, again, kind of thinking about what things that are coming across over the last couple of days. It's kind of back to basics and people first and relational aspects, and maybe some form of humanism at the core of it, or that will consider the person but in a social context. So I think that's as specific as I'm going to get right now. I'll have another think.
Christina, do you want to take it next?
I think it was quite funny to listen to Freirean theory, going back to the classics, and also I've been thinking about whether to invite, and this is again back to something I'm doing myself, thinking about, we've talked about career learning in school as easing the way to make sense of life, I guess, for young people. But what about if we were to invite some of these more classical theories of, for instance, Bildung? So go out of our own field and talk about how to become more knowledgeable about the world, to become a citizen that can participate and can think critically. Yeah.
So linking to your comment about 2008 and another potential economic crisis, so material conditions seem quite important. So I'm going to lean on Marx, and the political economy is obviously going to be, they're important factors. And particularly if I think about my own journey, because I started as a career practitioner, and then I initially started teaching career guidance, and then I became a sociologist in effect probably about 10 years ago. And that journey kind of mirrors what you spoke about in terms of, like, before the crash being about, positive psychology and about the individual and well-being, and then noticing how when we were sort of like buoyant about what Beck and Giddens would talk about, like class being a zombie concept, and then you get into the crash and austerity and all, and you realise, no, it's all about material conditions or new materialisms. But then you've got those complexities, which I think new materialisms, I think, are really, and Barrad's work, I think, is really interesting in that, in terms of superposition and how people are read in different environments, and how we're read will change the way in which we read ourselves, and the way in which leisure has been colonialised, and the privatisation of the commons that was spoken about, the second keynote speaker, for example. So career is obviously, whilst Marx, I think, gives us really, really important things to think about in terms of material conditions, it's also thinking about the complexities of, because in effect Marx is still sort of influenced by a sort of Newtonian physics, and I think the new materialists of Barrard and whatnot, trying to look at it from a sort of more quantum mechanics sort of perspective, which I think is more fitting with the kind of environments we're in, but we're still understanding those sort of material conditions that very much shape our lives. Because if a crash comes, it's going to do us all damage, isn't it? But then it's coming back to that importance of collectivity, which I think the Freirean sort of critical pedagogy and allowing those that don't have a voice to speak become important in terms of trying to create collectivities to make sure that those material conditions can be as distributed as equitably as possible. And for being a Southern scholar, we're also bringing aspects of decolonial perspective, which I'm obviously very biased about as well.
Would anyone like to add anything? I mean, we've covered the gamut of different critical theories over the last few days, but has anybody got any way of sort of thinking about what might be particularly useful or synthesizing that in any way? Yeah, Tom.
So for, this, I mean, I'm aware Sana and Anna gone, but I think that conversation about post-humanism yesterday, I think there were some points in that dialogue which were really important for clarifying how we engage in environmentalism and what our response is to that, and then similarly how we think about our relationship with technology and how we understand the role of agency. I think there's really fertile ground in that dialogue without having to advocate for a particular position, but I think that is I think for both of those conversations, that's a really interesting theoretical dialogue to be involved with.
I mean, we had in the discussion yesterday, we had quite an interesting kind of follow-on from that, which was, I mean, I suppose one of my worries is that critical theory ends up as another way for people to publish papers in journals that nobody reads, and it does, you know, and that often it's become quite untethered from its roots in some kind of transformative project. And I think in some of the stuff that we've tried to do, trying to find a way of doing that without being sort of without banning sort of abstract thought at all. You know, you want people to be able to think in ways that don't immediately have an application, but you also want the idea that there is some application to be there. What we were talking about yesterday was the idea that it's valuable and useful within this action to have a variety of different sort of ontological and theoretical positions, and that critical theory isn't helpfully kind of reduced to just one tradition. But we also need to argue and disagree a bit more than we perhaps sometimes are inclined to do, because if we don't do that, then it just becomes, oh, well, yeah, there's Marx and there's Foucault and there's Beck and Giddens, and they're all okay, they're all fine. And in fact, these people would have, you know, hated each other and ripped lumps off each other. And so, and I think it's important that we do expose those differences at times, really. Right, we're kind of getting short of time, but perhaps let's just have a few minutes on, and let's perhaps wrap together. We had various questions about implications, but what do we think are the implications of some of these things? I mean, we've got this kind of very complex set of problems and challenges people are experiencing in their careers. We've also got, I think, usefully, some really helpful tools to help us to think about and act on those things. So what sort of things should that do, and particularly, I guess, in relation to career guidance, however we defined it, or are these kinds of interventions that we're particularly interested in? So I don't know who, I'm trying to think whose turn it is to go first. Perhaps yours, Christine.
What's your question, Trish?
My question. Okay, good. Yes, my question
Because
is...
you're not following your...
I know, but we're running out of time. So my question really is, so what? My question is, so what? What can we do in relation to the area that we're most involved in, which is career guidance, career development? Taking all of these things, all of the problems, all of the theories, what do we do with all of this in relation to policy or practice? Anything you feel, not all, you don't have to answer the whole question, but just a bit, yeah.
Well, I think there's lots of stuff I haven't listed, and some of them are utopian. For instance, to have standards for what is career guidance, and we've talked about this throughout, even how we think about career and who's it for, and do we think about it as an individual thing or a collective thing. So, but that's probably utopian for lots of countries, I think. And then I think, as you just talked about, there is this thing about how do we translate abstract theories into not just concepts, but to something that makes sense for practice, because if we don't have practice and we don't have end users, whatever they are, then it seems to be, I mean, of course we must be able to think more abstract, but there's also got to be sort of a translation, and that goes into this whole cost project as well. What is it that we do together, and how can that make sense? So I think it's been very valuable to hear several people here say we don't just have to acknowledge that there are end users who are actually quite knowledgeable about their own lives and about what makes sense to them, and how lives would be led meaningfully, that we should probably be sure to pay attention to when we think grand thoughts of, like you just said, perhaps that none of us are experts, people are experts in their own lives, but still obviously bounded by structures and so forth. So I think from today, all this talk about, I don't know, we could say not research on people, but with people, but just be mindful of working with whatever happens in practice, not just being the toolbox to set out there, but the knowledge that exists there and that we should focus on. Yes, I think I'll stop.
So I think I'll land back on praxis again, really. So it's that one of the things that really attracted me to get involved with cost, apart from further in my own career, let's be honest, was this idea of that it's not just theory; it's trying to influence policy and practice. So, and one of the things that I underlined as well was like lots of speakers spoke about, you know, multi-layered influence, and it's acknowledging that career education and guidance is a political pursuit, and your practice will have an ideological position, and that the practice can only influence on a certain level, and that I think we very often forget the advocacy role that comes with practice, both as an educator and as a guidance practitioner, in terms of what can we influence, what agency do we have to influence at multi-levels. And I agree with you. So sometimes we can get the theory wrapped around our necks, but I think it's around what theory, our actions should be in practice is about, how theory can inform our actions. But what theory can you utilise to make it clear to yourself what your ideological position is? Hopefully it's a critical one, and then how can that inform what you do to try and influence at multi-level? So whether that's on the micro level with the students or the service users that you interact with, at the meso level in terms of trying to influence policy in your local institutions, and then on that more sort of macro level, whether that's nationally or internationally in terms of trying to challenge policy and ways of viewing career work and what career is. So yeah, I'll land back on this idea of praxis and don't try. My advice would be don't overcomplicate it if you're finding it's very complicated. What are the things you feel that you can tangibly do to inform your actions, as well as part of that being learning about the plurality of different approaches as well, which can inform that.
I'm trying to organise my thoughts and my notes in my head to know what to say. I feel sometimes when you're in groups like this, we're all into the critical perspective here, but there's a risk in us both othering all those baddies out there and othering ourselves as a bit special from them, and we have the right answers and they just want bad things and they just want more money and they don't want what's good for society. If we accept in a possibly a naive idea of everyone actually wants something good for the world, but some people view that as happening as long as the economy is going well, that'll be good for everyone. That's how we fix the problems. Whereas other people are going, if everyone's happy and secure and have agency, then the economy will probably sort itself out. So we're just all looking for the same thing. And I'm also thinking that, you know, in relation to policy and these abstract policymakers, and I'm just coming back with the question, what's the most effective way to address that? Is it to try and convince them that they're wrong and we're right? Or is it to speak their language? But then do we risk not challenging the language that probably isn't all that helpful? And if we're being, I don't know what the answer is, but on the one hand, we need to be a bit palatable, but on the other hand, maybe we need to tell a few uncomfortable truths as well. So I'm just coming back at you with more questions than answers.
Mariana has the answer.
No, I don't have the answer. But I was just thinking that maybe one of the ways towards the answer was already given, which is instead of being the researchers identifying what research says and giving it to policymakers, because research on that shows that policymakers read, say, oh, this is very interesting, but they don't change their mind about it. So the only way to maybe become a bigger and greater advocate or more efficient one would be to do exactly something that was already said today and yesterday, which is finding ways for our end users to say it, so that we are not. So a little bit of what the disability group says, nothing about me without me. That's what the disability advocacy groups say. And the thing is, we are advocating for people, and we have many different areas here. So migration, disabilities, simple common people, precarious people, whatever. And the thing is that I think our role is to find ways so that, and that's why I think Freire and critical pedagogies are so useful also, is because it may help us do that. So just that thought.
First of all, try to be in the shoes of the policymakers. They receive hundreds of policy briefs and recommendations every other day. One approach that I would suggest to do, and since we have the opportunity and we have the working group over there, we need to outreach, invite them in our works, and co-develop whatever we're going to have. I mean, DG Employ, Committee EMCO, the parliamentary, the MEPs, different agencies, different perhaps NGOs. We need to sit in our table and develop something together. This can create some impact, or we can have better chances to see the outcome, the translation of our work. So we have 2 years. Let's, in our workshops, invite them in our works and try to develop something together. This is what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Just also thinking about so what for practice, and from my own research and from working practice, I think that there are 3 groups of people when it comes to critical thinking. There are the sort of blissfully unaware of the wider systems that they are operating within and conforming within, and then there are those who are a bit uncomfortable, a bit aware of the tension, a bit kind of, but not really knowing what to do about it. And then there are the rare people who are perhaps critically aware, but are on their own. And I think as a COCAG group, and this would particularly, I guess, fit into working group 3, but for all, as we think collectively about this, how do we support those practitioners? Thinking about their starting points right now, how do we help those to become more aware and help those to understand their tensions and help the final group to not be so isolated? And I think that's about, I was saying in my session, community and also guidance and support. So maybe that's our next steps.
Lost the will to.
Well, yeah, the running around like this. So, is it just because it's late in the afternoon or something, and you've been talking about, you know, radical theory? Well, like, so look, if we like return to the origins of critical theory and take praxis seriously, you know, and praxis comes from Gramsci, and Gramsci didn't really use praxis in the sense of political campaigning. He meant it as in taking over the factory, right? That was the praxis, and out of that praxis would be realised a new consciousness, a new subjectivity, and new skills, and new orientation towards one another and to the world and to the natural world and so on. And, you know, okay, so that's very radical. But if you push the conversation we were having in the after the previous keynote this morning, and engage in not as career guidance for any particular career in the labour market, but career guidance as an intervention in the structure of careers. So not as an individual intervention, but a collective intervention through some of the new social movements and the trade union organising or the cooperatives. And actually, there might be opportunities in EU funding to fund that kind of experimental co-production of services or co-production of new forms of work, new forms of work producing new services. I mean, that's very radical, and it might be just because I've sat here listening to you all, and you're all quite inspiring and enthusing and so on. So, but that seems to me like actual praxis. And in some of the presentations we've had about the disability services and so on, and new forms of public employment service, you can see the roots of that kind of praxis potentially taking hold in some of the work you're all doing.
Yeah. No, just thank you, Philip.
I think that's. I mean, there's quite a few of the points there that are coming together. Is that there is, and this is perhaps something we need to think about in working group 3 more as we move forward. But I mean, as you say, also in working group 2, which is there are these traditions which are part of the critical theory tradition in Freire and Boal, who we were talking about very energetically last night, and various other, but which are about co-production, involvement of learners or and what does that kind of work look like if we bring it into a public employment service or whatever? And now, obviously, there are lots of challenges with these kinds of things, but it feels that there is that tradition of sort of participatory co-production, which and it's in lots of the theories that people have written of which are more critical theories of careers, education or career guidance. Those things are in there somewhere, but perhaps that is one of the things that we need to bring really to the fore, because it does give us some kinds of ways forward that allow people to think together rather than I think lots of the ways in which we're thinking, and that I think is true in our practice as researchers as well as in our practice in career guidance or careers education, is the opportunity to come together and think together and work, and then ultimately to try and do something transformative, whatever that may be. And that's, I think, the crux of it, is the tricky bit, is what that thing actually is. Would anybody on the panel, or in fact, let's just quickly go down the panel, have a last thought, and then we'll wrap up. Quick cup of coffee, and then back in here for a final session. So, back to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to come back briefly to the policy piece and sitting down and inviting them to our table. I suppose there are some structures that might be useful to look at as well, with young academies across, so EU structures. They're there where they have science advisors, and there's a whole layer whether we can tap into that or look at the structures that exist already, that rather than trying to reinvent wheels and drag people to our tables if there are already tables out there. So maybe that's something worth looking at as well.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll go back to sort of the idea of collectivity. So in terms of having these collective discussions, but also, yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, so I invite unions in to talk to my students as part of the employability agenda. And that's, I would argue, subverts the employability agenda because so how do you maneuver in these highly oppressive neoliberal regimes? Yeah, so yeah, it'd be great to do the whole sort of radical, let's fucking take it over type thing. But how can you maneuver in a way in which you're not putting people at risk? And so I think it's around trying to find inventive ways to subvert policies and subvert. So you want our students to be employable. Well, won't they be more employable if they're part of a union? You want them to have decent lives. Won't they have better life? And imagine if we spread that and everyone's doing that as part of the employability agenda. Yeah. And so in what ways can we also communicate with policymakers to find those kind of opportunities that you were talking about as well, engaging with different groups? So I think that comes back to that idea of, I think we've been, and particularly like when I think of my students who are neoliberal natives, like they know no fucking different. Like when I invite unions in, some of the students even say like, well, what's a union? Like that's how low we're dealing with in the UK, particularly with widening participation, a lot of widening participation students that I deal with. So I think it's about how do we we've got to make those social bonds in a way that we can then try and, I think, initially subvert to then get to a position where it doesn't feel as risky. I'm talking particularly from a UK context, that you can take on those powerful structures in the way in which I totally agree with you that we should be doing, but in what way can we do that in a way that doesn't put people at risk and harm?
It feels like we're shooting left, right, and centre here. I think there's this. I don't know if it's a proper word in English. Like there's always a cross pressure. If you're a practitioner, you're part of an institution that has something that you have to do, and then you have the client and you have to. There's ethics about being a practitioner as well, and then we want reflexivity for them, and then coming back to some of the stuff that we've talked about over the last couple of days as well, there's this complexity. There's also the wicked problem of the ones that we sit with who might not want necessarily what we have to offer. So how do we... And it also comes back to, I teach master students as well in to become careers professionals. And one of the things is they love the 5 signposts. They love this idea of working with it, and then when they've read through it and they've come a bit further into their education, they're like, okay, so how do I do this? So, and it just seems there is no answer to how you actually work with this. We can have thought experiments, and we can say, you just have to do what you can, and little is better than nothing, and all these things. But I just think it's quite interesting to keep an open mind that there are complexities when we talk about doing this and being advocates for people, for ourselves and the ones we want to help. So yeah.
Thank you. I suppose I mean one of the things that critical theory, one of the dangers with critical theory is it teaches you a million ways to work out why things aren't good and aren't going to work and what's wrong with everything, and obviously that's very useful. And it's in, lots of radical traditions, but this, whether it's sort of, scientific Marxism or whether it's feminist encounter groups, or we have this thing of like, where we take everything apart and figure out how it works, and then we have to figure out, well, how do we put it back together again? And we do need to carry on taking stuff apart, but I think we also need to be kind of carried on being a little bit optimistic. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody quoted Gramsci earlier on this, or yesterday, I think, the pessimism of the intellect, the optimism of the will. And I actually find my life, I actually have the opposite problem. I have the pessimism of the will in that I believe, like, I have no doubt that society will change. I believe that we are. I think it requires an incredibly sort of ideological position to believe that we have reached the end state and nothing will ever change again, and nobody, and also to lack the belief that human beings will find better ways of organising society. Like, intellectually, I find that like a very easy thing to believe. On a day-to-day level, I find the will to make that happen quite difficult. But I mean, when I come to events like this, I feel my will is energized, and I get a little bit more of the optimism of the will. So hopefully the last couple of days are charging us all up with a bit of optimism in both intellect and will, and so we'll try and take it from there. So I think we can close this session and take a quick coffee, and then, is that the plan? And then come back in here for a final wrap-up session.